Good God, what an interesting week it has been. We had Avengers Infinity War come out. We put the audio up for that on Patreon. My son nearly died this week, which was a bit shit. But luckily, Nintendo sent us a Labo so I could build a giant robot with him when he gets home. He's fine now, by the way. And on top of that, I came back from taking my wife away for just a night to recoup and get strength back to find that Master Looter is gone. We had a big Q&A from Blizz, which had a lot of people in uproar and arguments backwards and forwards. But after thinking about it and actually taking some time, I've got some interesting thoughts on why this might actually be happening. So recently, so many of you contacted me via Twitter and email to point me to a thread. Do trials deserve loot? On the MMO Champion forums, rating it a whopping 67 pages of discussion regarding the Master Looter change. The Master Looter change, of course, is that in BFA, Blizzard is going to remove Master Looter and force personal loot on absolutely everyone. Something which actually only affects very, very few people. And that'll be the crux of what I think is actually going on here. What was the big topic you people brought to me was that it was strange to read a lot of the thoughts in these threads and the arguments back and forth because loads of them just didn't seem to make any sense. In fact, it wouldn't be hard to believe that many of us are playing a totally different game if we were to approach this thread and try and read through it. From one perspective, it seems like people believe utterly that the Master Looter system is designed just to screw trials. What a bizarre idea. That's absolutely nuts to think that this entire loot system is designed just to fuck people who may be on a 2-week or whatever trial period. And yet they use it even when nobody's on trial. All this stuff was very, very weird. And obviously reading through it, people were arguing back and forth over things they clearly had no idea about. It didn't take much to read through it and find that most of the people advocating for the Master Loot changing, celebrating it, weren't raiders at all. And in fact, it didn't affect them whatsoever. And I actually believe this is what Blizzard is intending. If we were to look through these arguments, I'll give my opinion on them now, we can dispel a lot of them. The first one, that trials don't get loot. What an absolute lie. That is not true in any case, in any way, shape or form, particularly in Legion. What we have in Legion is the Titanforge system and bosses dropping more loot than ever before. So what we have is the very first few bosses that are on farm. Most people have everything they want from that boss very, very quickly, besides potentially the same item again on a very high Titanforge. That means that if you bring trials, there's always loot to go around. Very, very, very rarely do trials not get any loot. That would make no sense. If you're in a guild that's disenchanting rather than give the trial loot, I don't know what to tell you as to why you would be in that guild. That sounds very weird to me. Utter bullshit that trials don't get loot. The other one was that he's there because you need him. No, that's not how Mythic raiding works. And again, another thing that the Mythic raiders were saying, what are you talking about? In fact, most Mythic rosters involve like 26 or 27 people. Often trials are brought in while other raiders are actually chilling in voice comms, doing other things, and they could easily step in. The fact of the matter is, no guild functions with like 20 or 21 people. Therefore, you have trials all the time. Recruitment never closes for Mythic raiding guilds. They always open them up and they'll bring those guys in, and as I've already said, most people have loot they want from most of the bosses very, very quickly. Therefore, there's no issue with someone stepping out for several bosses every single week while trials get in to get tried. Again, another lie. Another one that we saw was, if he was bad, just kick him and move on. We don't do that either. Experience has taught us over the years that there are a number of reasons why a trial might perform badly for his first reset, second reset, third reset, and even fourth reset. Bosses have become so difficult in Mythic that if you were to bring in somebody who has zero experience on a number of bosses, let's say in Antorus, it could take several weeks of one-shot kills to try and grasp what exactly you're supposed to do here to play optimally. So you can't judge them that way. What you can actually find is you are stood next to 19 people who have potentially hundreds of wipes on this boss where they have learned all the nuanced little things they need to do. While you can certainly watch a guide like Fat Boss Guides or read a guide, there is no way in hell you can come and put that into action without ever seeing the boss before. That's just not how the game works. Again, this distinction between the reality and the fantasy that people seem to believe. So many people believe they can read a guide or watch a boss kill and then simply recreate it without actually being there in the first place. Very similar to the people who have never fought a fight before, who say, I would definitely win a fight because I just black out and I'll go crazy. It's simply not true against anyone who's got some form of experience. It's a bizarre mentality that a lot of people have. It can take weeks of people having to see a boss for the first time and actually gauge exactly how they do this correctly, and certainly adapt their style to how the guild does it. Let alone obvious things like transferring to a new server can cause add-ons to do all sorts of crazy things. Similarly, you don't know any voices on voice comms, and voice comms is usually not people announcing their name. What they're saying is, on me, and you're supposed to know who they are. In your first couple of weeks, you may not know who those guys are. That's going to affect your performance. There may be so many reasons that you've not had enough experience here where we can gauge you properly, so we don't kick people for that. On top of that, it might not be a performance issue. A trial period isn't just to see whether you can do good damage, good healing, good tanking. It's also about whether you fit into the social side of the guild. During this expansion, I covered this subject in depth and showed how in the Nighthold we recruited 17 people and eventually just wanted 3 people. It took 17 players of trialing them, testing them, giving them this time, then figuring out whether they were a good fit before they pass their trial, because they may not have fitted into the community of the guild. They may not have been able to learn and adapt to different strategies. There's a whole bunch of reasons that you can't just go, this guy's bad. But if you've had no experience with that environment, it seems like that's what would be the case. This guy comes, doesn't do super well on his first trial, we'll just kick him out. What absolute madness that is. It's total crazy. What was also strange is the lack of people really explaining why Master Loot is a good thing. The entire argument was skewed over screwing people over, looking at it from this side of this almost cabal of people shrouded in the officer channel who were just determined to fuck people over. I've raided with Master Looter since Wrath of the Lich King and never had a problem with it. Have I even seen Trials bitching about loot? No. Trials are generally more concerned with staying alive, not fucking up, getting to know people, learning the fights, all those kind of things. They know that loot comes eventually. It's not a problem, and they work on other things in that meantime. This was also completely glossed over, which gave rise to more questions to the people who were advocating for the removal of Master Looter. What we've got here is people saying this mystical 2-week period was used very regularly during this thread, and I did read all 67 pages of it. Believe me, I sat there and read it. This 2-week period of not getting any loot. What wasn't really brought up, although a couple of people really tried, was to tell people, and when your trial period is over, and if you are under-geared, suddenly you're a member now. You're somebody who wants to be a part of our core raiding team. Guess what happens? You get showered in loot. Very few people actually recognize that or wanted to use that in their argument, which raises 2 questions. 1, have you ever actually been a part of this process, or are you guessing of what you think it might be like and getting that wrong? And the second one, are you someone who fails trials? That you tried this out, you were there for a couple of weeks, and you failed and got kicked out, therefore you never saw the rainbow. You never saw the good side of this process. Those are the things that came out of there. Of course, Master Looter has massive benefits in Mythic raiding. There's no doubt about that. There's no way in hell it can be argued against, but it's not for the reasons people seem to think. They all seem to think it's some malicious process. Master Looter is used because this is how this works at the hardest level of the game. Something that so few people get to take part in that it has a mystery and an enigma about it. When we look at something as simple as, say, tier sets, we had spreadsheets out there of who had massive bonuses, and the difference was as much as a 20% difference between people and their tier sets. With Master Looter, we were able to say something like, the DKs get a massive benefit out of this, whereas your class doesn't. We should give it to them first. And the reason we're going to do that is because we're going to kill the bosses quicker. You've got to remember that in Mythic raiding, oftentimes we are dealing with extremely tight berserk timers because we only have a limited amount of resources, which would be gear or AP, to use and put into action during these boss fights. Therefore, we need to have the best possible players with the best gear in order to kill that and kill the next bosses as quickly as possible. And guess what? We all get a hell of a lot of gear from that coming out of there. More than that, we're happy to do that. If I say to my friend who's a DK and he says to me, what does your set bonus give? And I'm like, it's about 2.5%. And he says, well, I get 25%. I want, give it to him. Please give it to him as quickly as possible. because that's going to make our whole lives easier. And that's the benefit of Master Looter, is being able to say, hey, we have 2 necklaces here. One gives this amount of upgrades for you, this amount of upgrades for you. Give it to him. The problem with personal loot, of course, is you can't do that. It's going to assign a necklace to whoever. It doesn't matter how good it is. If the loot system says this is a caster necklace, it's going to give it to any caster. And that caster might go, this is really bad for me. In fact, the thing I got from Mythic Plus is better. I would rather give it to Tom. Tom gets a huge upgrade out of it. Oh, it's a higher item level. Remember, in BFA, we'll have no legendaries to cover every slot. I can't do that. That's a bad system. Over the weeks, that will work itself out naturally, but it's definitely going to be slow down and impede the progress of a raid team who only looks at loot as some kind of tool. Those are the benefits of Master Looter and why guilds prefer to use Master Looter. The idea that Master Looter is simply designed to fuck over new players is very bizarre. And although that case will happen, there will be guilds out there that are trying to manipulate the Master Looter system in order to gear themselves first. In the long term, that never works out. Now, this is what I took away from the thread. A lot of this discussion I thought was hyperbole and absolutely fantastical ideas, but what it did to show to me, and I think is what Blizzard's trying to address. Do I think Blizzard's trying to kill split runs with this? No, they know that's not going to work. There are ways around it. Do I think they're trying to slow down Mythic raid progression? No, not particularly. I don't think that's going to work either. A lot of people seem to focus on the split run idea, but you must remember, split runs are heroic loot. They're not mythic loot. Heroic loot isn't the end game. That's not what they're aiming for. Getting super geared in heroic loot is kind of a fallacy in and of itself. People getting lots and lots of heroic loot isn't going to stop the game, because Blizzard's already designed loot that is considerably better for them in the first place. The split running idea is just to get all the heroic stuff out of the way for a tier that you're not interested in, so you can get a little bit of a jumpstart in the mythic raiding scene, where the big loot drops. What do I actually think is going on here? This thread showed me everything I needed to see, and it also highlighted a similar thread that was going at the same time, which is not disconnected from this. And this was that the player base has gotten worse over time. If you think about it, that's not actually possible. When you start the game, you're the worst you could possibly be. You can't get much worse than being absolutely newbie at the game. There's no way of raising that bar. You join a brand new game, you don't really know what's going on. That's the worst. That's it, right there. And there's no way of getting worse at that over time. It will always remain at that point. The problem is, players keep getting better and better and better. So instead of the player base, say, in vanilla, being pretty bad, getting to reasonably good, over time, we've had people stay at pretty bad and get exceptionally good, where they understand the mathematics and all the intricate mechanics and all the difficulties and movement and being able to DPS and do all sorts of crazy things all at the same time and deal with situations that are unfathomable to a new player while doing very well. This has got thinner and wider as time has got on, while the same point of being bad has remained the same, but the top end has continuously pulled away and thinned out the player base along a spectrum of being pretty bad to exceptionally good, and that keeps separating out. With each new expansion, what we see is the loss of some knowledge because it's no longer part of the game, but the gaining of far more knowledge and more experience than you can count on your hands. You've got people with over a decade's worth of experience in the game that hasn't changed that much from the start of it. There's new spells, there's new mechanics to deal with, but being able to move around and get out of fire, all those things have remained pretty consistent, and they have thousands upon thousands upon thousands upon thousands of experiences with that mechanic. That's where the problem is. I think Blizzard's trying to tackle the fantasy, and this thread really highlighted the fantasy of what people believe guilds are like. And interestingly enough, we have tackled this earlier in Legion. I made a top 5 video of the myths of guilds. This has been coming for a while, is people have this community perception, something we've also brought up over Legion. The community perception of what they believe guilds are like. And reading through this thread, it's very apparent that a widespread amongst the non-raiding communities, they have these ideas, usually formed from horror stories. This brings me back to my earlier point about people who seem to have not made it through trial process and feel that they've been hard done by, begrudged. You got to remember, every story you read about someone being outraged, perhaps they're always getting kicked from groups, and you're reading that saying, well, I've never been kicked from a group, what's going on? The likelihood is they're a trash player. They're really bad and they tried in a guild and they got kicked, and therefore they have a horror story that goes with it where it will certainly be biased towards them not being the problem, but the guild was the problem. This was the problem. On top of this, we've got the age-old discussion at this point, particularly in my community, that so many people have joined cesspool guilds. Cesspool guilds are what started around Kata mainly, where they came to prominence, where people on alts traditionally started guilds that swallowed up entire servers in order to reap the benefits of guild activity, turning into gold in their bank for themselves. This meant that everybody was a part of a guild, but what they weren't a part of was an organized, decent guild. So when people were saying, join a guild, they were answering, I'm in a guild. It's corrupt. It's dangerous. The guild master takes all the gold for himself. We're just playing to feed his pocket. All these horrible experiences have now culminated to the point where I would love to see the numbers. I would love to see the numbers, but I dare say that an enormous and an absolutely ludicrous number, perhaps way over 95% of the WoW player base, only does LFR at maximum. And we're now at a stage where the amount of people taking part in normal, heroic, and certainly mythic raiding is drastically emergency life support low. And that's not good, because that's a dissatisfying experience for a lot of players, and they might not realize it, but at the same time they're looking on at the alternative with horror and fear in their eyes. Very apparent from here how many people believe that every guild, and I'm not underestimating this, I'm not blowing this up, these threads exist here, every single guild is operated by a corrupt cabal of people who are out to fuck them over constantly, and that's all guilds are. But in fairness to them, perhaps that's the experience they've had joining cesspool guilds that maybe put a normal raid together or a heroic raid where any loot that dropped went straight to the guild master or the raid leader because they organized the raid and all this kind of crazy nonsense, and that's what they believe all guilds are, because that's their only experience. I believe Blizzard is using this system to try and kill the fantasy rather than the reality. The reality is it doesn't really work this way. I showed that at the beginning of the video. Hasn't worked like that for me for nearly a decade, and for everybody I talk to, it's the same for them. They don't understand it. This thread is almost comical in its inaccuracy. However, the vast majority of people seem to believe this to be true. And therefore Blizzard maybe feels they need to do something about it. This is what I think is going on, is the culmination of all these things coming together and Blizzard saying, we can't beat the fantasy. The community believes this to be so. We know it's not so. Watcher himself has been a long-time raider. He probably knows this is not the issue. But can we say that we need to tackle your stupidity? Because it is ignorance. It is ignorance of what's actually going on in order to fix this problem. How does this fix this problem? Well, if you believe that all guilds and loot systems and trial processes are corrupt and manipulative in order towards screwing you over, a good way of getting people started, especially people who live in a world based entirely on personal gain and item level, which we have discovered recently in the Warlock series we did, right? This is all this stuff coming together. You've got a player base who believes guilds are corrupt and manipulative and will steal your gear, and you play World of Warcraft in a world that is based entirely on item level and gear. That's the only reason that you are playing. The best way of doing it is ensuring and guaranteeing that you have a fair shot and you can't be screwed over and you can't be dicked. It's actually a very clever way of doing it. So while we look upon this Master Looter change and go, this really screws us up because we have huge benefits to using the Master Looter system, and it is also treating us like children, suggesting that we are not allowed a choice in how we manage our guild. It will be dealt with by Blizzard themselves, and that choice and that control will be taken away from you despite its obvious benefits in an organized, mature raiding environment, because we have an enormous, perhaps millions of players who seem to believe this. I really wish this thread hadn't started with Trials Deserve Loot too, because the entire focus on the subject was whether or not it was about dicking over Trials. That's not the case. That's not the case, and it made the conversation very, very skewed. But in my opinion, this is Blizzard trying to fight the fantasy, trying to beat the fantasy in order to encourage people to take part in what they believe, and I do still believe this, that there is a better way of playing WoW. It's a way that we play, and most of us listening to this probably playing, and to kill this fantasy and this idea of what's going on. I just want to point out that I have had people come to me who are in mythic guilds who say that they're pretty sure their loot system is corrupt. And certainly those players who have joined heroic progress guilds. So you can we have to be fair here and say obviously the caliber of players in a system that is pugged regularly, right? Heroic raiding is pugged regularly. Who are joining guilds that are progressing heroic probably do not have the best caliber of players. I think that's fair to say without being offensive. Are getting manipulated, are getting abused, and I don't know, and I can't possibly speak to the circumstances of those. But this change goes further than heroic. It goes into the mythic guys as well. And again, this may just be, and I believe it to be so, encouragement for people to give things a try if they clearly state that everything will be totally fair on what you value the most. And what so many players value the most is gear. So there you go. That's what I think. What do you guys think? It's my theory anyway, is that they're just trying to deal with this community perception. It's almost impossible to change. Look at how many people were shitting on classes just because of what was picked for the MDI, the Mythic Invitational Tournament. And looking at other classes like, oh, they're terrible. Every tank besides a Blood DK is the worst. This perception has been coming for years, and there's plenty of reasons from it. From cesspool guilds all the way up to just being dicked over in a trial and giving out horror stories as to why that might have been. I'd love to see your thoughts on it as well. I'll be back next week with another bigger video to cover these kind of subjects. I think it's the best way of tackling it. All right, guys, thank you very much. Bye-bye.